It's a pleasure to be here today. I want to talk to you about a management theory widely used in all areas of management. Specifically, I want to challenge the assumptions of that theory and how they may make us try to manage buyer-supplier relationships and other business relationships the wrong way. This theory is principal-agent theory. Let's start with an example. A Finnish manufacturing company is about to bring a new product to the market. They've outsourced the technical development and manufacturing of a particular component in that product to a foreign company. It comes time to assemble the final product at the Finnish factory. But it turns out the component and hence the final product don't work as expected. What does principal-agent theory says has happened? The supplier cheated us. They used perhaps second-grade materials or didn't put enough resources into quality testing or product development. But is that really how all buyer-supplier relationships work? Let's examine a bit in more detail. Principal-agent theory deals with principal-agent relationships. So principal, one party delegates some work and with that some decision-making authority to another party, the agent, expecting that the agent acts in the best interest of the principal. Both the principal and the agent can be persons or they can be companies. So for example, a manager delegates a task to an employee or a buyer company outsources production to a supplier company. The theory is focused on trying to prevent and manage what is called the agency problem, when the agent does not act in the best interest of the principal, but rather in the agent's own best interest. This is because the theory assumes all agents are by their nature opportunistic and self-interest seeking. So when the goals of the principal and the agent are not completely in line, and because the theory assumes that the principal does not at any one point in time know everything that the agent knows and can see everything that the agent does. For example, a buyer cannot at every minute know what is happening at a foreign supplier's factory. This gives the agent the opportunity to act opportunistically, which the agent by their nature takes. So the principal suffers from incomplete information, not knowing, seeing everything that the agent is doing, which gives the agent the opportunity and thus the principal the risk that there will be opportunistic behavior. What does the theory say? How should we manage this risk of opportunism? It presents two main alternatives: monitoring or incentives and penalties. So for example, with monitoring, this Finnish purchasing company could make random material audits at the supplier's factory to check that they are using as good quality materials as is needed. Or of course, nowadays, different information systems can be used in monitoring. Another option, incentives and penalties. So for example, poor performance on the component, we have clauses in the contract and the supplier is hit with rough financial penalties with that, and hopefully that would prevent any such behavior in the future. Well, in different fields of management, we've seen decades of research into what is the optimal governance mechanism, what is the best way to monitor, what is the optimal penalty, what's the best incentive. And yet we see these agency problems taking place within and between companies still. Is it perhaps by our focus on assuming opportunism as the only cause of these problems, we are only thus solving part of the problem, and despite optimal governance mechanisms, agency problems persists? I mean, already for several years, agency theory has been criticized with this opportunism assumption. Are human beings truly always and only opportunistic? And can we even transfer this assumption to organizations? Can we assume that organizations are by their nature always opportunistic? Could there be something other than opportunism that explains a failure when a task is being delegated, such as mistakes, habits, incorrect information, false assumptions? For example, in complex product development projects, not knowing all the things and uncertainties that would impact the best choice in materials and technology. This is the focus of my recently started Academy of Finland research project, that there are alternatives to these failures rather than simply the agent acting opportunistically. So we want to challenge the assumptions of this widely used management theory and offer alternatives instead. Not just the opportunism, but you remember the theory assumes that the principal has incomplete information compared to the agent. But if you think of long global supply chains, one company in one relationship is a principal, in another relationship is an agent. Why would that same company in half of its relationships suffer from incomplete information and in another half have perfect information? Isn't it more logical that in all complex relationships there will be incomplete information on both sides? A researcher by John Hendry has already a couple of decades ago put forward an alternative assumption, saying perhaps agents aren't opportunistic, but perhaps both agents and principals are honestly incompetent. And we have actually proven on a human agent level this in a previous empirical research and now want to extend this into buyer-supplier relationships. So what this theory says is that both principal and agent are burdened by honest incompetence. Perhaps the principal hasn't been able to completely explain what in any given situation is expected of the agent. Let's say in complex product and technology development, what, given that the market and technologies constantly change, would in all possible scenarios be the best option to do in manufacturing. And perhaps the agent hasn't completely understood the instructions despite trying in their best interest to do what is in the interest of the principal. So this is where we want to focus on. So let's come back to that earlier example. An agent failure occurs. The components didn't work as expected when we put them in our final product. We don't know what is the true cause. At the moment, everything says it's opportunism. The theory says it must be because we were looking away for a while. They used second-grade materials. They didn't put enough quality testing in place. They were opportunistic. Equally, we could say, perhaps because the whole product and not just that one component with the supplier was being developed, also the principal made constantly choices in technology and materials that impacted the performance of that one component, but didn't communicate enough, and hence the agent made poor choices that retrospectively weren't in the best interest of the principal, but not acting opportunistically. Both sound like plausible scenarios, both need management to act on them. But at the moment, the theory is pushing us to simply consider opportunism and act based on that. So remember, assuming opportunism, assuming that only the principal suffers from incomplete information. Addition to this, the theory actually says that there are many things in a business environment that make the agent even more likely than normal to act opportunistically. Physical distance between the principal and the agent, uncertainty overall in the business environment, and complexity of the technology being outsourced. All these, exaggerate the information symmetry, make it very difficult for the principal to know what exactly in agent actions led to a particular outcome or prove opportunism, and therefore agent is more likely to act opportunistically. But if you think of these factors I just mentioned, physical distance between the principal and the agent, overall uncertainty in the business environment, complexity of the technology being outsourced, aren't these the kind of things that equally likely could cause hidden expectations that the agent didn't understand what in any given situation would be the optimal choice for the principal and acted honestly incompetently? To me, it seems plausible. It's not just the theory assumptions that push us strongly towards just considering opportunism. It's also how empirical research on this theory is at the moment largely conducted. I've studied a large amount of research that investigated agency problems in buyer-supplier relationships. What they tend to do is they do a survey where they ask the buying company, what's been happening in this relationship? Has the agent been opportunistic? How have you been trying to manage it? So perceptual, single-sided data of what do we think was the problem. And often the fear of they're going to cheat us is bigger than the likelihood of them actually going to cheat us, which lead us perhaps to false results. And overall, we tend to suffer from this confirmation bias in many of our research, that we test a particular theory in different contexts. In many cases it holds, but in some cases it might not hold. And then we discuss why in this particular scenario the theory doesn't hold, but overall it's a good theory, rather than that we would test a theory and some alternative to it, where we might find alternative explanations when the particular theory failed. Well, you might say, what does it matter what we assume as in our theories, and how do we research that? Well, these grand management theories have a huge impact on what's in management literature, what goes into textbooks, how we teach to manage relationships in business. Therefore, these assumptions can transfer into management assumptions. And it isn't just that through our kind of textbooks and whatnot they transfer. Overall, there's research, not in agency theory, but elsewhere, to suggest that many people suffer from what is called hostile attribution bias, that you always tend to perceive your own performance better than you perceive anyone else's. And if there was a failure in a cooperative relations, it was because the other party didn't do their part, not because I didn't do my part. So there are a lot of assumptions also by managers which can kind of push us towards opportunism. Well, again, you might think, what does it matter? The agent failed. We need to manage the situation better. Monitoring, incentives, penalties seem like good ways to try and manage a supplier. So why not do that? But if you think of what if the true cause was actually honest incompetence that we just didn't realize, it would be completely different governance mechanisms. We should be training the agent, guiding them, having two-way communications, things that lead to a cooperative relationship, as opposed to harsh mechanisms such as monitoring, penalties, incentives. Because if the agent, the supplier company, had honestly tried to do their best in product development, and you'd throw at them a lot of monetary penalties and monitor them harshly, it creates negative feelings in the relationship. And this can actually, in the end, create opportunism, the very problem that you are trying to prevent in the first place. And all the penalties, monetary penalties in the world, won't make the agent do the right thing if the agent doesn't understand what is the right thing that you want in any given complex situation. So this is the key message in what we want to study. Both us as researchers and managers need to be careful in how we interpret and frame problems in buyer-supplier relationships or in business relationships in general. And we hope with our research to be able to better identify where are the situations where we're actually more likely perhaps to see these hidden expectations and honest incompetence rather than opportunism and hidden action. And with that, help to suggest a more balanced set of governance mechanisms, both training and guidance, sometimes monitoring and incentives. I mean, agents are no more always opportunistic than they are always honestly incompetent. The key is identifying which is the situation in any one case. And at the moment, too many things are pushing us just to assume opportunism without considering the alternative explanations. And there's a lot of research being spent studying the optimal governance mechanisms for monitoring, and a lot of actual business money is being spent on monitoring incentives and penalties, but it's not time or money well spent if we're only fixing part of the problem, if the agents still make mistakes out of honest incompetence. And this is what we want to tackle and hopefully provide a more balanced, less biased viewpoint in the future. Thank you for your attention.